Welcome again to Brandon Mitchell, who's come in to tell us about his time with the Ukrainian army. And you're just back from the front, and it's been pretty tough out there, but thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks a lot, Lindy. I'm quite endeared to come here because Joe's first video with you was widely received. I think like 2.5 million views.
Right.
Joe McDonald, when he shares his story, I've watched almost all of them. I've either experienced it or I know somebody that I personally know who's experienced everything that he's ever talked about.
Right.
It was probably the most truthful interview I've ever seen from someone who'd been to Ukraine. Yeah, so real pleasure to be here.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, now where we left it at the end of the first interview, you were just about to see your first proper action, your first actually, if you like, military mission.
Yeah. That's there's a lot of anticipation, a lot of what's it going to be like.
So how long have you been in Ukraine for at this point?
Okay, so we crossed over March 16th and did all that malarkey that I talked about before. This would have been, I'm tempted to say, maybe April 10th-ish. I couldn't give you an exact date. I don't suppose it really matters.
No, but it gives us some idea of how long you've been there.
Yeah, but
so a lot of psychological build-up to this.
Yeah. There was a lot of psychological build-up. Would I get on a team? Would I? But the team had been made. You know, everything had been dealt with, and we're going to go to the Zaporizhzhia front. So, the day we set off, because the army's always it's the same in Ukraine. Hurry up and wait. Yeah. So everything was ready, you know, like I had repacked my kit, double packed my kit, and tore it all apart again. And decided what would I leave in the base in Kiev, what would I bring with me. And nobody told me until the next day, because we didn't go to a rotation. We went to a city called Pavlograd. We drove all day, so in the back of the ambulance, not really seeing much, taking all these weird roads. We had a forward base somewhere near Pavlograd for Hospitallers Battalion. And, there was faces I'd never seen there before because there was a lot of people in our battalion. But I got told that night when we got there, the next morning rather, we're actually going to work in a hospital. And I said, well, nobody told me that. We're going to work in a hospital. And I said, okay, well, take it as it comes. This is good for Edouard, who is an intern, a doctor specializes in emergency medicine. This is good for Dima, who is a anesthesiologist intern, and I'm supposedly the gunner for security. That's kind of a redundant role, I would think, in a hospital.
Yes.
You would hope.
But what type of hospital? Is this a mobile field hospital? Or
No. So all over the country, of course, there's a lot of hospitals in Ukraine. In our area of the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, this was the first actual hospital from the Russian lines. Okay, so I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't even know what I didn't know back then. I still don't. But
I don't either.
No, you don't. It just goes on, doesn't it? This hospital was the first point, but it wouldn't be the final destination, obviously, for a wounded soldier. Maybe they would go to Zaporizhzhia city, they would go to Dnipro, but this is the first real hospital. So I remember when we showed up there, it was a grey day, kind of like England. A lot of East Ukraine's very, very grey, nice Soviet grey.
What are you saying?
Sorry. But the reality was, get to the hospital. It was quiet.
Yeah.
There was no casualties. There was no trauma, and outside this hospital, everybody just sitting there. Doctors. A lot of doctors in Ukraine smoke. A lot of people smoke in Ukraine in post-Soviet culture, and we were to meet the commander, like the head regional medical coordinator, and apparently before the war she was in media. She had nothing to do with war-related activities. And I don't know what she said, but she was like an Italian woman. The hands were moving everywhere.
Italian by the sounds of it.
Yeah, so basically. But nobody ever explains anything to me. The Ukrainians, I just sit there, stand there, you know, la 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 la. And then afterwards, our commander, Julia, she turns to me, Brendan, we will go now to get our rooms. I said, okay, well, you know, that's all great. And, you know, into the hospital, up on the levels above, there's not really many patients there. You know, it's not like that sort of hospital. It's all medical staff who live in the hospital. You know, so we go up to the 3rd floor. Here's your room. Edouard, the Frenchman, Dima from Kharkiv, and Max and Julia. They were a couple. So she was the commander of the crew, supposedly a paramedic. He's the driver, but they're a couple. So they get their own room. Now in all these rooms, it's I'll never forget, and I've tried to avoid them almost successfully the whole war ever since. 4 beds, but I call them Stalin beds. Okay, so basically what it is, you lift up this thin little mattress of whatever it's made of. Oh, it wouldn't be about 2 inches thick, and then there's this chain mail underneath it, right? And so I'm looking at that. Like, I don't lie on the bed first. I wanna see what the bed is, because I put a bag on it, and the bag, it's I don't know, it's not about 15 pounds, and there's quite a big depression. So I lift this up and I look, and it's this rusty like chainmail. Anyway, that's a Stalin bed. Okay, and that was my home. So that's a little room, small little confines. Here you go, boys, you're sorted. This is the toilet. Okay, that's a shower. Ooh, you know, this is good. We got toilet, we got shower. We even had Wi-Fi. I was like, yeah, this is great. Okay, and there's a supermarket down the road. And it's like, this is, so I was prepared to go to war, you know, and the doctors are outside smoking. I think someone's even eating an ice cream, like in a packet, you know, like something like a Magnum bar, something like that. I was kind of felt a bit deflated, because I didn't know I was going to a hospital till that morning.
Right, so psychologically you've arrived all pumped up, ready for action.
Ready to go. I've got a gun. I've got everything. I've got these. You know, it's.
And I've got a bed and the loo over there, and I've got a shower.
Yeah, and we've got Wi-Fi access to everything even things I shouldn't be looking at.
Right, but you didn't look at those.
No, you know, like Wikipedia. Try to avoid those websites.
Oh, Wikipedia.
Yeah, but that's what it was like for a couple of days there. It was quiet. There was another doctor, Volva. He spoke English. See, I'll never forget the English speakers, because you know, at that hospital, some people could say hello, goodbye. Every Ukrainian, whether they're an old person, Soviet educated or not, they can all say one thing in English. London is the capital of Great Britain.
Which is correct.
That's it, though. That's it. Because apparently the way their education system worked, it was listen, repeat, listen, repeat. So they didn't learn English very well. But Volva could speak English. He was a surgeon from Dnipro. He was very friendly. So I'm getting to know him. I'm getting to know Edouard a lot better, the Frenchman. And Edouard smokes, which it's fantastic, because he's a Frenchman, always talking. Yes, I am a doctor. I want to specialize in internal medicine, and lovely guy. We weren't allowed to go to the supermarket on our own. Julia said, now I'm a 35-year-old man who's been everywhere I've been in the world. Julia's 28-year-old, but she's my boss. Brandon, it is not safe for you to go to the supermarket. You do not speak Ukrainian, you do not speak Russian. Anything could happen. Nothing was happening here. You know, in the supermarkets, about a 4-minute leisurely walk. But I could go with Volva, you know, and it's like, yes, you can go with Volva. So this is very important, you know, to develop friendships. And just like everything, we waited for some days, and nobody's planning anything, like what you will do. There was guys coming in, so we'd get like a wounded guy in, have a hole in a leg or whatever, but there wasn't enough work for us to do, because our job is to help Army Medical. But if there's no help needed, there's not enough work for them.
Well, it's just to me that you've got such an overstaffed hospital, underused, that they're waiting for a sudden need for them on a massive scale. Basically,
but this wasn't apparent to me at the time, you know. I don't know when it was, but at one point, you know, I said to Vova, I said, you know, I'd like to learn to do more. These are my limitations. This is what I can do. He said, yes, I can show you everything. And he started going over medications. And funny little thing, there's all kinds of medical aid coming in from like this part of the world, that part of the world. A lot of it's in Cyrillic. Okay, so it's Ukrainian. Ukraine produces a lot of medical products. Okay, there's a lot coming from Germany, America, everywhere. So all of a sudden, what a big task at this hospital to do, doesn't matter your medical level, is to take every medication and translate it, in our case, from into Ukrainian, and I learned how to write in Cyrillic, and numbers are numbers, okay, thank God, and into English. So you'd have a box of a Portuguese, you'd have it was quite time consuming. And then I'd start saying, well, what are the most common medications? I'm thinking I can be an assistant here, because I'm not a nurse, I'm not a doctor. And he said, that's an excellent idea, Brandon. I can show you how to draw this up. Generally, we need this much on a busy day of this. We need that. And I'm like, oh, look at me here. I've got ampules. You know, you crack the glass, and I was drawing up everything perfectly. I basically become like an orderly. Next thing you know, they start to get really busy. And what happened, ambulances would come in, 4-wheel drives would come in, at different varying, you know, you'd see 2-3 a day, sometimes you'd see 20 a day. And what their job was to do there was to stabilize a casualty for further transport, to go to Dnipro, to go to Zaporizhia for longer term care.
Right.
So I would start to see guys come in with like horrific wounds on their legs and stuff. And I was like, oh, how can I help? And what happened, I was kind of getting left out of the whole thing. But I'd start watching what they do, and there'd be like 5-6 people to one casualty. So there'd be 2 beds in the surgery, and then there'd be another room for overflow. And generally over 20 minutes, they would work on a casualty, 20, maybe 30 minutes. What I noticed right away, was like, what can I do? Okay, well, a big thing they had, so maybe someone would have a tourniquet over their leg and there'd be a wound. They were very careful. They'd need to cut off all the wet, bloody clothes, you know, with the paramedic scissors. I'd noticed someone going through all the pockets. They tried to find all their documents, their phone, quite a few grenades, things like that would be in the guy's pocket.
So they're often unconscious.
Some of them are unconscious, some of them are screaming. But that's something that had to be done right away, because they'd receive some sort of care on the way to the hospital, right? But the surgeons and the anesthesiologists needed to go on further work. So there was always 1 or 2 people there who were doing all the work to prepare it for them, to get the clothing removed, to cut around the tourniquets, to get the wounds right, to get their documents, to get anything dangerous off them, like grenades in their pocket, say, for example, ammunition. So I watched this, and then what I discovered, see, I don't speak Russian, I don't speak Ukrainian, but I thought, I'm just going to dive in. But it's kind of hard to dive in the middle, because there's a team, 4 or 5 people. It was the same pattern over and over again. Get it all ready for the doctor to do his work, you know, and his work could be hard or easy, but it was the same stuff for the nurses were doing the same stuff all the time. The orderlies were doing the same stuff. So what I thought one day, and I talked to Edouard, I talked to Vova about this. Every time they had casualties, they'd roll them over. It'd usually take about 20 minutes, and then another ambulance would come and bring them to Dnipro, Zaporizhia. So we'd have a cigarette outside, and I'd ask them questions. I said, can I just hop in? Like I noticed with the ambulance, people jump on it. Why don't I just be one of the first guys in there, and I'll start doing the scissors? And they're like, excellent, Brandon. I was like, all right then, that's what I'll do. And we got no more casualties, but I kind of made a resolution to myself that this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to step into everything. And sure enough, the next day, I had my opportunity. People were always outside the hospital. Like this is middle of April. So the weather was starting to get a little bit nicer. Always sitting there, drinking coffee, talking. But they might get a phone call, they might not, that ambulances are on the way. But everybody's ready. So I got gloves in my pocket and I got scissors on me. First thing you do, you hear an ambulance come around the corner, get your gloves on. And I was one of the first guys on the ambulance. they would get the gurney, the stretcher off, and what we got to do, 3, 4 of us, 5 of us, bring that guy in, lift him off, learn the lift procedure,
Yep.
to put him onto the surgical bed. And from that point on, ambulance crew is out, their job is done, they got to clean their ambulance. But now I've got the guy, I've got the pair of scissors, and I just took a chance. It was common sense. Okay, somebody's working on that wound on that side, there's no wound on this side, but we've got to get his boots off. So if he can do the laces quick, or I cut the laces. And look, you want to talk about smelly feet on some of these guys.
No, actually, I don't.
No, I don't suppose you do, so shall I just move on?
Yeah.
Yeah. But they were quite damp and wet, and they lived in trenches and all those things you could imagine that I'd not seen yet. But then start cutting off their clothing, cut up the scissors, be very careful. They'd have all these weird and wonderful pockets. Sometimes, depending how cold, they'd have different layers on. But then you'd find things along the way. You'd find passport, you'd find mobile phone. He might want to have his phone to call his family eventually. That was so important with the Ukrainians. Before a guy left, always they'd say, does he have all his documents? Does he have his phone? And then, so that would go to the next hospital. Sounds silly, but it's really important, you know.
It doesn't sound silly. No, I can fully understand.
Compared to the doctors, all the things they were doing, I was doing a lot of little things, but they were really important things. Then it came on to the point with the medications. Biggest wound in Ukraine, I learned, it seemed at that hospital at least, if we had one guy with an amputation or an internal wound, there'll always be 2, 3, 4 guys with concussions.
Right.
Yeah, and that's something I didn't know much about concussions. That's something Ukraine takes very serious. So the general protocol, there was 3 drugs. You'd get your dancetrine, dexamethasone, dexaketaprophene. These were the 3 drug protocol. Generally, you'd run a catheter into them, and then these drugs would be preloaded into syringes by me. You know, I was quite proud of that, you know, because I'd already learned how to label them and gone through painstakingly. I can recognize certain drugs in Portuguese and German and in Cyrillic. You know, just little things. I was real kind of pleased with myself.
Yeah. Have you dared do an IV at this point?
Well, what happened, I started preparing all the drugs, and I asked Vova and them, I says, can I administer them too? Because I have a bit of IV practice, but I'd like to get better. But if you get, 5, 6 concussion guys, I can have all that ready. That saves like a half hour, 40 minutes work for a crew.
Right.
And I want to do that. And they say, yes, Brandon, of course you can do that. That's great. And first through the observation with Edouard, the French doctor, he would double check my medicines, because that's the way Western medicine works. You confirm with the person beside you that this is the correct dosage, that this is, sadly, they call it closed loop medicine. So I'll give you an ampule, this is ketamine, and what do you see? I see 30 milligrams ketamine. Confirmed. It's just a safety protocol, whatever level of medicine. Sadly, Ukrainians don't really do this, and it seems so simple.
Right.
But he would observe me, and I was getting pretty good at the IVs, and that was a big barrier, you know, because I'd failed horribly before, and it was all going well until one day we had a man. I didn't know this at the time, but he was a colonel, and I didn't think that would be pertinent to it. I blew the vein in his arm. I pierced too far. This can happen quite often. Depends. And he was quite nervous with needles. He was like, "Ugh," and I was quite oblivious to this, and I was like just trying to focus on my job. I had so much success for probably a week doing this, and I was feeling great about myself. But then my commander Dulia came up, which was quite her fashion. Brandon, you are incompetent. You cannot do your job. Take this away from him. So I was effectively I was barred from doing IVs. So I don't know what her role was there. She didn't seem to do much work. She'd do some things with paper, but never any work. Nor would Max. Dima was fantastic. You know, this anesthesiologist. Those guys are fantastic with needles. They're the ones who will numb you up in any way, and they know every drug. You will feel nothing, Lindy.
Good.
Yeah, and he works a needle just like your mother was sewing. So he's got his purpose there for the surgeon. The more and more I was working in there, I learned you had to jump on the ambulance right away because I don't have the language. But as long as I'm there for every step, I know the next step because I learned it. If I was even gone to the toilet and an ambulance came, I couldn't jump in 2 minutes later. It just didn't work because they were always moving in their rhythm. What did happen, it was really quite sad to me. We had a busy night, a very, very, very busy night. And this was a civilian hospital originally, still is. I remember a man came in probably in his 70s, 80s with his elderly wife. He had a stroke, and quite a bad stroke. And there's so little I can do because of the language barrier, but I know a stroke.
Yeah.
And he was put in a corner, in a dark corner, left over somewhere, not forgotten about, but left in a corner to piss himself. And his wife crying with him, but sadly nobody could help. You know, and that was very sad for me. That was very, very sad. When we do nothing, we do nothing. But when we work, my God, we bloody work. No work is good work for medics. It took me a long time to accept that when you're not working, it's a good thing. A couple of days later, I was lying in my bedroom at night, and all of a sudden a bunch of soldiers came by and Dima, and they're all running out with guns. And I'm like, what is going on here? And Dima's like, it'll be okay, like in a movie, you know, like very dramatic. And then I grabbed mine because I was like, well, I'm supposed to be in charge of security here. Maybe there's finally a role for me. I didn't understand the whole thing till afterwards, which happened. I kind of just went along with it. So there was some of our guys and the military police. Some of them actually lived right beside the hospital, and there was always military police at the hospital. I came outside. There was a Lauda, a Gigoli, which is the most typical Lauda anybody would ever imagine.
Right.
And what they were gypsies. They were a family of gypsies, and they had some sort of family feud, and one of them had sliced open the stomach, so the innards were showing out. They had brought their son, their cousin. Right. But they don't travel in small groups. There was no less than 20 of them there. Of course, we're going to give him medical treatment, but from what I learned later on, they took great offense that all 20 of them couldn't go into the surgery and hold his hand or whatever. And this is madness by my point of view. You know, this is a medical surgery. You don't belong in there. You know, maybe the mother could come in at one point. I'm trying to think of practical considerations. Yes. But they took great offense to this. And when I came outside, when the full-scale mobilization started, a lot of guns started getting handed out to different people. Right. I know in Kiev, after the Battle of Kiev, the people started handing their guns back. You know, like, no, the war is over here. Unless you're in the army, you don't get a gun. Well, they never gave back their guns, these country village gypsy people. So they've got Kalashnikovs. And when I come outside, there's about 4 military police and Dima, and it's kind of like what do you call it? Like
standoff?
Yeah, OK Corral kind of thing. Yeah. So I get involved in this too, and I'm thinking to myself right away, this is absurd, because I didn't know what was going on at the time. I just see these civilians with AKs against the army with AKs, and they're not Russians. And it's like, well, this is not a clear-cut matter. The Russians just shoot them, and I don't speak the language here. It's purely for me to follow the lead of everyone else. This went on for like 10 minutes maybe. But what happened, Oksana, who was the medical director, she was quite famous in media. Oksana Korchinska was her name. She's quite well known in Ukraine. Right. She'd been fighting since the old war to advocate for soldiers, like in the old Donbass war. Right. And she went right to the Minister of Defense once, and the deputy minister, this is a side note, I learned about her, and she was fighting that the soldiers should get more support, and she went into their office, and they were eating McDonald's for lunch, and they weren't listening to her. They were quite chauvinistic too, and maybe she went about it the wrong way. They weren't listening. She definitely went about it the wrong way. She grabbed his McDonald's fries and threw it at the Minister of Defence's head. So I've heard that story from several different sources in Ukraine, in different places, since I've known Oksana Korchinska. So she's our friend. She's a little bit crazy, but she's an advocate for the soldiers.
Right.
We're in the standoff. Oksana is there very late at night. She got in between all the guns. So there's probably about 8 guns pointing 4 or 5 each way.
Does she have a burger in her hand?
No, she got no burger in her hand, you
okay.
dafty. I don't know how she did it, but she managed to talk them down. Like we want to help you, we want to help your son, but maybe 1 or 2 of you can come in, but the rest you're going to have to wait there. Tomorrow you can come back and visit, but this is a medical facility, you know, for hygiene, for so many reasons. You need to let the doctors do their work. And I don't know, I think if any man tried that, we'd all be dead. But just the way she was able to talk to them.
Do you think they knew who she was?
I don't know. There's a lot of things I don't know in Ukraine. I didn't know who she was at the time. I didn't know that they were gypsies at the time. This is all told to me the next day over coffee.
Right.
But they calmed down and they realized maybe that was sensible, that 20 people can't go into a surgery. But that was my first real acceptance that I don't speak the language. What initiatives can I really take here? I need to be basically the best Brandon I can be to help everyone else. You know, that was quite an experience, because I was expecting war, and then I'm working in a hospital, and I'm feeling pretty good about this, and then it's turned into like a Mexican standoff. Yeah, funny thing about that hospital though, we all got to know each other better. Eventually, one of the surgeons, his name was Igor, and he doesn't speak a word of English. So I tend to use a lot of memes with less words, you know, to communicate, to make jokes, make them laugh. What happened, one day there wasn't anyone there, but he only speaks Russian. He was trying to remove shrapnel and in someone's arm, because it was fairly easy, it wasn't in too deep. And he asked me to hold the hemostats, the clamps. Right. And well, he cuts, but then he's kind of motioning to me, and we've got our gloves on. So I said, well, it makes sense that I would occlude here to hold back the skin, not to pull it apart, but to hold it apart, to let him to do his work. Right. So with one hand I'm holding the hemostats, and then I'm intuitively pulling at the skin to make it easier for him to go with the scalpel, and then to go in with the tweezers to pull it out. I was essentially assisting in surgeries. One turned into another, to another. The civilians was always the hard thing, because they would come to the hospital. And I was doing this, like, I was quite impressed with myself, like how I was handling all this and the trauma and being an assistant. With one of the doctors, he had me, a woman had lost a good portion of her hand, maybe like a 50-year-old woman. I don't know what happened. I just know what needs to be done. And she'd also vomited. So I had like a vomit bag, and basically my job was to hold that at her mouth, and with the other hand to kind of peel around the hand where he can clean it with peroxide and start to get in there and to remove debris. I think it was a combination of things. It could have been her tears, the eye contact, because she was, the anesthesiologist had numbed her up, but you can still feel things prodding around your hand. It's not nice. I found out later on in my experience in the war by being fixed up, she was crying and she's looking at me, and I don't know if it's the smell of vomit or the hand or the contact, but I started to get dizzy, and it wasn't 2 seconds. The surgeon, it was like a feeling. He was looking at me, turned, and he doesn't speak any English. Like, I've never heard him. He said, "Are you going to be okay?" And I was like, yes, I am. I carried on with the job, but that was the first time. All the time working in that hospital, it was so absurd. I'm not allowed to go to the supermarket on my own. I'll tell you, a great time to attack Ukrainians is in the morning, because they don't get out of bed early. Even at the hospital, it's a very minimal staff downstairs. I go running every morning. You know, this is the last town before the Russians. It seemed quite absurd to me, but why not? I'll go for a run. We've got a shower. I got my headphones in. I was quite fit early on into the war. I always was. I go for a run. I'd go do whatever. I'd come back, and maybe by then my teammates would be awake. But I wasn't allowed to go to the supermarket on my own. Yeah. So it was weird like that with Julia. There was a lot of power and control. And the weirdest thing, I'll finish up on the hospital, because I was Orthodox Easter is like a week later.
Oh, right.
I don't know if it was talked about, but more or less the Russians and Ukrainians decided the first Easter I was there in 2022, it got very quiet because we didn't hear anything in the background anymore. We didn't have any helicopter warnings and it's like they decided to have a little truce.
Okay.
I don't know if that's true or not, but how's the war going? Ask a medic. We were having shashlik. You know, we were having like kebabs and stuff outside. We were having a little barbecue for Easter.
Right.
And there might have even been some alcohol going around. I don't drink, but people were having shots to celebrate Easter, which is a bit of a no-no. But kids are going to play.
Is Ukraine?
It's Ukraine. But this is my first experience in the war, and I've seen this so many times. When it's busy, it's serious. But when it's quiet, from the medical point of view, that's when weird things happen. Like weird, silly things. We hadn't had a casualty in about a day and a half, and it was all nice. But then, as we're having our shashlik, we've got to go in. We got a casualty. So one casualty, the whole crew is outside, but everybody feels guilty to let one crew go and for the other crew to not at least see what's needed. Well, it was quite amusing. A man had been shot in the buttocks. Yeah, like Forrest Gump.
Yep.
You was thinking that, wasn't you?
That's from the pronunciation of buttocks, yes.
Yeah. I was shot in the buttocks. But what it was, I'll just demonstrate here. It was a soft tissue wound from the top, and it came out around the fold of the arse.
Aha.
Right? But he was conscious. There was nurses in there, older nurses, younger nurses,
right.
And he's having a right laugh about this.
Okay.
You know, because it doesn't probably hurt that bad because it's a soft tissue wound. And everybody's complaining. It's like, I'm not doing it. And someone translated this to me. I was like, what have they got to do? It says, well, they have to inspect for further penetration. They have to penetrate to inspect for any other penetration. And it's like, I'm not doing that. I'm not. And Igor drew the short straw, I guess. And yeah, that was our amusement for the day. A man shot in the ass. And yeah, that was fantastic. But that's the way the war is. It seems when it gets quiet, that's when like stupid things happen. I think he probably got shot by one of our own guys, if I'm honest, by like a negligent discharge. Okay, unless he was mooning the Russians, I don't know. But that pretty much led up to the end of the hospital.
You mean your time at the hospital?
My time at the hospital.
Yes. Sorry to pop up like this, but that's the nature of the internet, I'm afraid. Things popping up all over the shop, like I was beset on all sides with adverts for settees, or sofas, as I believe the young folk are calling them these days. And this was shortly after I had just bought a settee, or sofa, or couch, if you're American. And so I thought it was particularly stupid, not just annoying, but stupid, because who's going to buy a settee? I wasn't, because I just bought one. They even knew exactly the type that I was into. I didn't want another. Well, it would be quite nice to have another one, but that's not the point. It was annoying, and perhaps you found the same. And if you were to take heed of my sponsor, Incogni, then by clicking the link, for instance, in the description, or going to incogni.com/Lindybeige, you'd find their details of an offer, which is 60% off a year's subscription, and maybe that will help. But no, you might say, this is ridiculous. No company can possibly hope to get all my data off the web. It's out there. The whole web is awash with it. Every single time I've bought something, every time I've got some clothing, my height, weight, and shoe size is out there. Every time I've applied for a job, my entire work history is out there. No, it's hopeless. Well, actually, it's sort of not. I don't wish to belittle you, but one tiny piece of information about you is not actually worth all that much money. Your shoe size, for instance. who really cares? But what if someone were to collate the shoe sizes of many, many millions of people into one giant bundle? Then possibly there would be something that a shoe purveyor might want to buy. And this led to the rise of the data broker. They look like this. Possibly, or maybe they look like this. We just don't know. And they sell large bundles of data. And interestingly enough, you can get them to remove your data. You can just write to them and say, "Dear data broker, hope you are well." Always helps to be polite. "It would be lovely of you if you remove my data from your records. Thank you so much. Love and kisses," etc. And do you know what? They are actually legally obliged to comply, but they don't have to make it easy for you. So, do you know who these data brokers are? Do you know where they are? Do you know what languages they speak? Do you know how many hoops you will have to jump through to prove to them that you are who you say you are? Now, you could, as one option, spend weeks of your life writing to all of them and getting your data removed. Or you could click the link in the description, go to incogni.com/Lindybeige, get 60% off perhaps a year's subscription, and then get them to do it. And I did this, and I found it really remarkably easy, which is saying something, because if you know me, and anything to do with computers with me tends to go wrong. I know I'm a YouTuber, but it's true. Anyway, I was quite impressed that they got rid of 2 data brokers' records within minutes of my setting the thing up, but don't expect instant results across the board. This is the state of play after a couple of weeks with me. So you see, they're chipping away at it, and then I'll be plagued, I imagine, by fewer adverts and fewer nuisance calls and all that sort of thing, and just, the savings in tinfoil.
Hospitaller teams support different medical units, and I was only figuring out how it worked at the time, that for so many weeks or months you'll be with 28 Brigade, 63 Brigade, 93 Brigade, in our case in a hospital, which I guess not a lot of hospitaller teams had done that. But there was teams working farther forward to the front, along with Army medical and civilian medical, that were bringing to our hospital. But I was told, now it's our turn to go to the front. I said, well, I remember Rebecca's team, the American nurse. She was working in a front position, coming to our hospital, and she was saying, yeah, some days are pretty busy, so again, I'm going further forward to the Russians, but I don't know. I've heard, but I've never been. We will leave tomorrow, and I'm like, okay. But the only problem was Edouard wasn't coming, the French doctor. He'd become one of my best friends now. He had taught me so many things, him and Vova, because in between every casualties, between the rotations, almost as if in real time, we would talk about the situation, and that was my knowledge in trauma medicine over 1 month with the volume we were dealing with, and being able to ask questions like there's no stupid question. He was gone. My greatest asset was gone, and I was the only foreigner to go forward. When we left the next day, I didn't know how far it would be. We got told to go and stop somewhere along the way, and there was a hangar. So I always just watched the Ukrainians. Max, the driver, would talk with this Ukrainian big burly soldier. He's like, come, kava, coffee. And he invites us into this hangar that's got to be like the size of a big giant airport hangar. And I swear to God, I'd probably be lying, but it seemed like more at the time. There had to be like 20 tanks in there. T-72 Russian tanks, well, Ukrainian tanks. And I was like, what's going on here? And it's like, they're getting ready. And it's like, okay, but we're going down that way. Yeah. I was like, okay, we'll take it one day at a time. We went to a house. I couldn't tell you where the house was, but somewhere between the hospital and the Russians, closer to the Russians, in this small little village. And we showed up at this house, normal house. Yeah, park the car over there. Park the ambulance. It was like a T4, T5 Volkswagen, right? Like all the new age travelers like to have, but it wasn't. It was an ambulance, and we parked it, and we put a camouflage net up, and this was going to be where our point was for as long as we'd be there in the war. And then we go into the house, and there's a couple soldiers there, and some of them are like, I was quite surprised how old they were. There was some young guys, but there was men in their like 50s and 60s, and I thought, like, aren't they too old to be in the army? But these were men who were accustomed to work, to labor. You know, the hands, the veins, the muscle structure in the forearms, and we get invited in. Right, this is where you'll sleep, Max and Julia, obviously, and this is where you and Dima will sleep. One big bed, and
It's wartime.
yeah. But again, it's quiet, you know. And I was like, well, aren't how far are the Russians? And they said, oh, they're probably about 4 kilometers that way. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty close. But what's everybody doing? You know, it's like, well, they're making a pot of borscht. And I was like, okay. And they had a big propane bottle, a big propane cylinder. They have them everywhere in Ukraine with like a burner that screws onto the top. And I'd never seen that in the West before, because it's a big pot of borscht. It seemed a little bit unsafe. But I'm kind of wondering, like, when are we going to work? When are we going to do, you know, that we're supposed to be on the front now? Everyone's like, nah, it's all right. And I always feel like this everywhere in Ukraine. I show up with armor. I didn't have a helmet at the time, ready to, you know, for everything. And they're just in their sandals, you know. And it's like, I kind of feel kind of a bit silly. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of feel like Captain America now. You know, like maybe I should just chill a bit. And all of a sudden, sometime in the afternoon, you'd hear the ground rumble. You'd feel it shake. You'd hear the shells. And I'd ask someone like Max, because he spoke the best English. I said, "What was that?" "Oh, that was a 152 shell." I said, "Well, how far away was that?" About a kilometer." I was thinking, a kilometer away, and I can feel this in my chest. You know, and I'd never been through that before. Like in Kiev, when we were training, that was a long ways away. You heard it, but you didn't feel it. Next thing you know, again, we're waiting for days and days. I remember our first casualty, we got maybe about a kilometer down the road, we'd get the call, and we'd have to go to meet them. And they'd be like on a pickup truck, like a Mitsubishi L200.
All right, yes.
Very common in Ukraine. Like every second army truck is an old 20-year-old Mitsubishi.
Right.
Tough as nails, you know they are. And we go to this point on the end of this dirt road. There's about 4 or 5 casualties there. There's about 20, 30 soldiers doing this and that, and it's the beginning of like a little gravel pit. But it's kind of like an offshoot off the road. There's guys laying there. There's soldiers over here with their kit sorting this out. There's a lot of yelling. There's a lot of screaming. And this was we waited probably 4 or 5 days. It's our first casualty, our first transport. I don't know what was happening at the time. I don't know, because I don't ask for translations. I just try to intuitively do like I did at the hospital. We throw the guy in onto the gurney, into the back of the ambulance, but I'm supposed to be like the gunner,
right,
like the driver. And these roads are horrible. Like you don't know what potholes are. And Max is driving. I was like, "How long to the hospital?" "Oh, about 40 minutes." And they're screaming in the back, "Max, stop!" Because she can't run IVs. She can't do anything with all the bumps. Okay, go. And then next thing you know, she's handing drugs forward to me, to ampules. I'm the gunner's kind of a redundant job now.
Yep.
She's like, "Brandon, here, mix this. I want 4 milligrams of this, 10 milliliters. So that means 6 milliliters NaCl, saline. You know, so I'm drawing them up as she's telling me.
Yep. And
on this bumpy road, thank God I've practiced with hundreds of ampules in the hospital, but now I'm doing it with a needle, and I'm not spilling a drop.
That's the stuff.
Yeah, that's the stuff. Practice makes perfect. And I'm handing them back, and only after I hand them back, I look at one there. I was like, "Oh, that's ketamine. Imagine if I had stuck myself with that. I'd have a bit of a wild trip here." But what became apparent, she stopped the vehicle, and she ordered Max to stop. Maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes in, she said, "Brandon, get in the back." I was like, "Okay." Leave the gun, all this. I get in the back with them, and what happens, they had I don't know what happened between, but they had an IO, okay, that's IO basically goes into your bone marrow. Intraosteal? Intraosteal.
Os is bone in,
Yeah,
so yeah.
yeah.
So
And so if you can't get an IV going on someone, you've got to find another pathway. Okay, so it
Right.
goes right into the shin, into the shoulder, into your bone marrow. Okay, it's as painful as it sounds if you're not unconscious. But it broke, it snapped, and they're trying to rig things, and it's so bumpy on the road. And I don't know why I'm in the back here, but I grab a hold of the side of the ambulance. There's like a rail. And I hold on to Dima's armor plates, the anesthesiologist, just try to stabilize him while we're moving, so he can, just to take, maybe 10 kilos of pressure to hold him in place. What happens, they ask me, they start doing compressions on him, like CPR. Okay, now I'd never seen CPR before in real life. Later on I learned in the wards, not really practiced in military medicine, because if you're at that point, they're going to die. They were doing compressions. I was in quite good shape at the time. I didn't know how much energy that took. She had put a decompression needle. Okay, so the second intercostal space in between your ribs, that's the gold spot. What happens, the man had... No, I'm not going to take off my clothes to show you. If you have a penetrative wound, you've heard of a suck-in chest wound before.
Yes.
Okay, the skin swallows over it, and they're quite hard to identify, so you have to rake the skin. Okay.
Right.
Now, a person could be perfectly fine with a penetrative chest wound, but what happens, little bits of air gets inside. Slowly, over 30-40 minutes, this can become a very serious problem. I'm not judging those medics, it was still early in the war, but nobody communicated that with us. Nobody had identified that this man had a suck-in chest wound. So what happens, the air builds up, and it puts pressure on your lungs in the inside. And then... what happens from that point, pneumothorax, then that pressure on your lung starts to put pressure on your heart. Attention pneumothorax. A person's in big trouble. She had actually punctured the lung in a moving vehicle trying to put a decompression needle into a second intercostal. I was just told to do compressions. I'm not the boss. And every time I did a compression, the decompression needle, little bits of blood would squirt out. It was like Dexter. It was like a horror movie, and I thought to myself right away, I don't know why my mind goes in these places, but I thought, this is not like Baywatch. Do you know, like David Hasselhoff used to do this and save the girl, and this is not the way it's supposed to go.
I don't remember sucking chest wounds in Baywatch.
No, but they're always doing that, and they get to kiss the girl, or
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way in real life.
But different music as well. Playing.
Yeah. There was no music, unfortunately. We got to the hospital. We brought the man in, and they hooked him up to a defibrillator.
Right.
But unfortunately, he died there about a minute later. And that was the first person that I personally feel responsible. I was part of that.
Right.
And the same doctor that I was holding the woman's hand, who speaks no English, and I was about to pass out, who said, "Are you going to be okay?" This is some weeks later into my war, and he said to me, "Good job." And I don't know how I felt, but I know he wasn't just saying that to make me, like, I did my job regardless of the outcome. And then we cleaned up the ambulance, and it's quite a process to mop and sanitize it as best you can by Ukrainian standards.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking right away, oh great, the supermarket's there, maybe we can stop for ice cream. That's my first reaction. And we did get ice cream.
Good.
Yeah. You're looking at me weird. I started to look at myself weird, metaphorically speaking. On the drive back down to our position, I'm happy because I've got an ice cream, because I haven't had one in a few weeks. And everybody's really quiet. And I start saying to myself, Brandon, I think you should learn to read the room a bit better. And I thought maybe I should shut up. But I was just thinking about my chocolate ice cream. The next day we had a very quiet day, and that was my first time that I was like a menopausal woman. I was like I was happy, I was normal, and then all of a sudden I was sad. Okay. You know, that it was an emotional roller coaster. But we stayed there for a long time, and And I was very frustrated because I would get like half a 3G signal on my phone. So maybe I could keep in contact with Rebecca or someone else, what's going on. And they're like, yeah, we're really busy. And I was like, well, why can't we go help? But that's not the way medical works. Everyone has to stay on their point for theirs. And maybe there's teams in the rear that can come help, maybe not. That was a very difficult concept for me to accept. The front line, in terms of medical, that's the front line. But it leads to a triangle, which would be the hospital at the top. So therefore, the hospital, all that busy work we were doing, well, if the whole front line was popping all the time, the hospital would never be able to cope. And there would be different medical points, evacuations. I didn't know what I didn't know about war. Some days went by. One day I was even getting a suntan. We hadn't seen anyone in so long, till guys came screaming at our house. Come, davai, davai, davai. And we came out, and there was a young 18-year-old boy, and he was burnt to a crisp, and do something. But we can't do anything. But I remember my training originally in Kiev. You can't be seen to do nothing. You have to get those guys away, and you have to act as if you're doing something. And then a minute or two later go to them and say, I'm sorry, but we couldn't do anything. You cannot go to soldiers, angry soldiers who've been in a fight, and say, no, he's dead. If we have the resources and time, if we're not triaging.
Was he actually dead when you first saw him?
He was stone cold dead. I looked into his eyes, and he was burnt. And somebody even wanted to waste epinephrine, adrenaline, on him. And I knew, with my limited experience, I was quite, why are we wasting that? But time went on. My commander, we had a few conflicts. I wanted her to train me. I wanted to learn more. There's so much stuff you can learn on YouTube. And I'm watching YouTube videos with my signal. It was bad, but sometimes you could upload them. And will you train me? What do you need to know, Brandon? I said, well, you're a paramedic. Well, you know everything you need to know, Brandon. I said, I don't. Well, tell us what you want. Well, I'd like to learn more about airways management, recognizing signs of internal bleeding. Well, what do you want to know about airways management or internal bleeding? I said, could you make it a bit easier for me? You're the expert. And I begged her for training when we were sitting around doing nothing, but she liked to play Candy Crush. And after some time, I said, I would like to have more training, and I'll keep working with you another rotation after this. But if this doesn't improve, I have to go find another team. And I thought that was quite reasonable, and that's the tone I said it in. And she snapped at me, and she turned, Brandon, you do not make ultimatums to me. And I was like, okay. Well, I've been in relationships before, maybe not all women, but most women. I know what silent treatment is. She spoke English, Max spoke English, her boyfriend. She wouldn't speak to me for the next 3-4 days. So by default, he couldn't speak to me. So I was effectively cut off from the English language altogether. So then I learned to make friends with the dog. That was very interesting times. The dogs, there's a lot of animals in Ukraine that roam free because their owners have left. So the army feed them, they take care of them, dogs and cats. And some of the Ukrainians used to laugh at me, but I developed quite a close relationship. Around that time, I came to Ukraine with about $7,000. The thing was, I budgeted, and I was spending no money at all. But I figured maybe $20 a day might be a budget. I could last for a year or more.
Right.
And if I could last a year or more in Ukraine, I've done quite well. One of the Canadian boys who was in Hospitallers messaged me. He was going home. And he had really, really nice armor plates. And if I would like to have them, he can't afford to give them to me, but he would sell them to me at the cost price. And he would buy more later. I don't know why he'd need armored plates in Canada, but he was a gun enthusiast, like in America. I respect that culture. They were $1,000. I agreed to buy them before I knew the price. And I felt I couldn't back out, but I also felt it was a good investment. I have 20 kilo thick Soviet armor from Brezhnev era, which is cutting off my breathing. Wouldn't it be nice to have this high-speed American armor? You know, it seemed like a sensible purchase at the time. But I was like, how am I going to pay for this? I'm going to run out of money in the war. Like, I don't have a helmet. So if I have to buy my own helmet, well, I'd want to buy a good helmet. How long will I last here? 3 months, 4 months, 5 months? I decided I'll start an Instagram account because I heard people were getting money on Instagram and social media, and people in the West were, like, certainly earlier in the war, they were just throwing money at any foreigner going to Ukraine. So I thought maybe I'll try it, and I'll start a social media account. But what do? You know, I can't be just filming casualties like, hey, look at this guy, he's gonna die, you know, and
No.
No. What does one do?
You've got a dog.
Yeah, I've got a dog. This is the thing. What I did, and my commander was like, you can't film this, you can't film that, security. So I keep the camera down, and all the dogs and cats, I'd make little videos. The first one was at the hospital. There was a photographer there who agreed to film. Just me and Edouard. Edouard was still at the hospital. I was at the front. And we did a little presentation about our ambulance. And that was my first post on Instagram. I thought, who would shout me? Because I heard people could share other people's stories. I was learning as I was going. I wrote to this guy, Johnny FD. He used to travel around with Bald and Bankrupt, who's very popular on YouTube. Johnny lives in Kiev. He's American. Maybe he'll shout my Instagram, you know, and next thing you know, I'm at the hospital because that's where I get good signal, and I get a phone call on Instagram from Johnny, and I was like, because I used to watch him on YouTube before the war sometimes. A YouTuber's phone calling me. It's like, you're Brandon, right? And I was like, yeah. You're trying to start a fundraiser. Well, yeah, I want to buy helmets for our crew because we only have, 2-3 helmets and they don't even fit. He said, well, I think that's fantastic. I want to help. I've been helping Ukraine causes. I'm going to send you $2,000. And I was like, okay. And he's like, this is what I need you to do. Film a video sideways, because I'm a tech retard. That's for my YouTube.
Right.
And just at the end of the video, just thank me. So we filmed a video of the ambulance. Anyway, I'm trying to tell Johnny on the phone, why don't you wait till I get to Kiev? And he already sent the money to my PayPal. And I was like, oh God. That's a lot of money, $2,000, you know. I thought, I'll tell my commander, because spiritual practices with money I learned in 12 steps. Someone just gave me $2,000. I wanted to buy us helmets. She's like, Brandon, we need 4-wheel drive. And I came from, my family had a bit of money, small business owners. She had no concept of money, the difference between helmets and vehicle. And I said, okay, well, I'll whore myself out on the internet. So then I just started filming cats and dogs, and during the explosions, and I started making little stories or polls where people can name the cat and dog, and I give them all like funny names. Like, do you remember Sir David Attenborough, the boat? What did they name that?
Boaty McBoatface.
Boaty McBoatface.
Only they didn't, because yes, but famously they perhaps should have. Yes.
Yeah, but I loaded the polls, so we had Captain Jack. The cat was Johnny Cash, and I started making little soap operas on social media about the animals. The war carried on, but I can't film casualties. I got to be creative with this. So people would message me, and every person that followed me, I'd send them a voice message thanking them. I'd look their name up. Thank you very much. I don't ask for money, but if you want to share my content. Then shit got serious. Okay, it was a quiet med point. We got a phone call that there would be an assault, a Ukrainian assault. We didn't know exactly when it would happen, but we would hear it. And then later on, we would get a message on the radio to report to what's called a stabpunkt, a stabilization point, a makeshift hospital.
Right.
Yeah. So here we've been down on this point for a month. People have lived, people have died. There's a lot of days in between where there's nothing, just a shaking building and dogs and cats. So we didn't know when it would be. We're staying in the house, all our bags are packed, ready to go. And then all of a sudden, maybe 3 a.m, we wake up and the house is shaking. But this time it's not Russian in the distance. It's Grad missiles. Like the big Stalin organs, artillery, but it's behind our house, and it's further back, obviously, and it's just boom, 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 boom. 3 a.m, obviously we're not going to sleep, so I'm going to get up and I'm going to chain smoke, and because that seems like a good thing to do.
Right.
Yeah. I was so surprised, probably not till noontime we got the call, and the stabilization was maybe the point we were supposed to report to was about 3 kilometers away from where we were, down the road, kind of parallel along the line. And what it was like the Soviets used to build these communal centers. Even the smallest village had like a community hall.
Right.
It would be a dance hall where people like you could do Lindy Hop, or they could do communist propaganda, or, communist stuff.
Probably wouldn't have been Lindy Hop in communist days, but yeah.
Whatever communists do. But every village had one, and this was quite a big building. You'd walk in, there'd be an entrance, and then there'd be a big hall. Could be a dance hall, could be a whatever. We showed up at that place on a grey day. It was kind of post-apocalyptic. The war was well on, and we were late, but we got the call when we did. There was ambulances coming and going. There was tanks moving back and forth, like a BMP, BTR, BRDM. Well, as soon as we get there, my commander goes off and does something, and I'm just kind of standing there. Oh, well, I'll have a cigarette, And then next thing you know, a BTR comes by, and like 2 of its, well, BTR only has 4 tires, I think, but one of the tires is blowing out. A BTR has 4 tires on each side.
Right.
And like 1 or 2 of the tires is blowing out, and it's going like this, and everyone's looking at laughing at it, and I was just. This is my first war I've seen. Like I can hear it in the background. I can hear like explosions are closer. I can see the holes in all the ambulances. Like it was a bit more than the hospital, and it was a bit more than the Battle of Kiev. What I was seeing coming back from my perspective. There was a guy on a motorbike, street and trail bike. I know the model. He was a KLR 650. Because my friend had one of those.
Okay.
Those are iconic for like it's kind of like the Chuck Norris bike, like Delta Force.
All right. I'm not familiar with it.
Not familiar,
fine.
but yeah, you're not cool enough for Lindy. 80s
No.
action. He's got an RPG on the side of it, rigged up. He's got an AK here, and he's got something else Jimmy rigged, which I've never seen to the front, and he's got steampunk goggles. And I was like, whoa, this is a real warrior. This is not the wars this is not NATO. And so I'm marveling with that. And then my commander's like, Brandon, come. And I was like, okay. And we walk into this place, and there's ambulances. They have these old Soviet long pole stretchers, and they bring guys into the main foyer, and they're sorting this, kind of like my old job, like snip, 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 cut the clothes, get a lot more grenades and a lot more ammo and things coming off them. And then they go into another room, the big main hall. Everything's very dark in there, because they're kind of under power, so they have flickering lights from the generator, but the doors were open, so you had daylight's grace. And they had these tables, just long tables, put together like dinner tables, say for example, and then they throw a sheet over them, and that's right, they didn't even have a bed. That's where they threw the casualties. Again, doctors, anesthesiologists, surgeons, nurses, doing the work on them to bring them again. These are people that the medics who pull them off the front positions to the first vehicle of evacuation, they say they will not live to the hospital. So this is a new level for me. This is because the ones, but whether they had a stabilization or not, yes, they're going to live the 40-minute drive to the hospital. But now these guys aren't going to make it that far. They're going to live 20 minutes.
Right.
This is a different level.
And someone has to make that decision then and there.
Yeah, and so a lot of people during this battle would have never come to us, but this was the most extreme. Well, I'm not supposed to swear on your channel.
You can swear a bit.
Yeah, this was serious shit. This was serious shit, and they had a room off to the side, and I wondered what that room was for. The guys who went in there never came out. But I'm trying to assess my role here.
And everyone around you is speaking in foreign.
Yeah, no, there's no English speakers. It wasn't until later on. So there's Max, there's Julia, and there was 2 officers in that unit and one soldier in that was 1st Armored Brigade, Persha Tankova from Chernihiv. I'll never forget them. There was about 3 people in that unit that spoke English. So Julia wasn't really a good leader. Anyway, she was who she was. Deema's going to get over there with the anesthesiologist. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be right there on the ambulance. I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to haul them in, and I'm going to start cutting. I'm going to remove grenades. I'm going to remove everything. And that first day there, what happened, I'd never applied a tourniquet in my life to someone for real. But what I noticed, and I know it was on his left-hand side where I was sitting, there was a big gaping hole in the side of his leg. And that hole had not been sealed. He had a tourniquet. It had not even been wrapped. It had just been plugged. But someone pulled it out, or it started coming out, and I noticed a slow pulsation of blood coming out of his leg. So they were about to pull him off, and I said to the doctors, the one thing I know they understand, stop, 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 stop. They do it like a shit. Anyway,
yeah, but that word is pretty universal.
Yeah. And I had a tourniquet on me, but I just thought it would be quicker instinctually to actually tighten it again, the turnstile. And sure enough, I watched the blood stopped. So he was slowly bleeding for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, however long. But for what it's worth, I stopped an arterial bleed that was slowly dripping. So I learned right there that if it's valid, don't worry if you're a doctor or not, speak up. What happened, so this was an assault, a Ukrainian one. We tend to have a lot of casualties when real estate's very expensive in Ukraine, for lack of a better way of describing it, for any side. I seen other foreigners there, and I heard them speaking a funny language. It sounds quite retarded. And I was like, are you from Estonia? Because I knew Estonians. No, we're from Finland. And I was like, oh yeah, I know they're very similar languages. They sound so similar. And I was like, really? So yeah, we're with Azov. And I heard of Azov before. I was like, oh right, you guys are like pretty hardcore. You know what I mean? And anyway, they were there, talked to them a bit, because it gets quiet sometimes. You get 10, 15 minutes. They were gone. They had to go out on another wave. I've never seen them again. I hope they're still around. But then the dead started coming too, to us, or people who died there. So that's what that other room was for, off to the side. I remember one man, again with the steampunk goggles. They love all that stuff, steampunk, Warhammer in Ukraine. There's a lot of nerds at heart, but pretty cool nerds, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, but this guy, I'll never forget. He had a long ponytail. This was a civilian that became a soldier, you know, like that's a lot of Ukraine. And I remember I had his passport, I had his documents. He had a lot of grivna in his pocket, Ukrainian money. But I remember he had like 500 euros in his pocket. And I never did it, and I don't think I ever would. But I thought for a second, I said, well, isn't Ukraine a corrupt country? Maybe someone's going to take this along the way. You know, that'll never see his wife. Why don't I take it and I'll put it towards my fundraiser or something? I didn't do that because it wasn't my place. But I remember his name was Stanislav. I don't know why I remember. I put his passport, I put his money, I put his phone, everything. And that was my last body bag, you know, put him in, zip him up. I think that day we had about 20. And when you don't have body bags, what do you do? We have these moon blankets. They're like gold on the outside, silver on the outside. You know those plastic emergency blankets?
Like the end of a marathon.
Yeah, those ones. And we'd use gaffer tape, duct tape around the legs and around the top. Sorry for being downer. I'm just telling you the way it played out. The whole time we're working there, they come in different waves. We even got to sleep the first night till about 1 a.m. at some time. Then we got woken to work again. The 2 men that spoke English, Alex, great guy. He was a doctor, but he can't make any money in Ukraine as a doctor. And he's kind of a by the book man, like no corruption. So he became a pharmaceutical salesman. See, in Ukraine, it's very common, and it's not even considered corruption in their culture. A doctor will never turn you away, but sometimes the families, depending on what they have, because a doctor makes nothing, they'll give him 500 grivna, which is like $20. They'll give him 1,000 grivna, and he will accept that, but he won't name a price. It's a gratuity, like a waiter. Alex wouldn't do that because he didn't see that. He even seen that as wrong. He was a pharmaceutical salesman, but when the war happened, he sent his family away to Germany, and then he signed up. So now he's a doctor again. There was Alex. There was Igor Petrovich. He was the commanding officer of that unit, and he spoke English. And during a quiet moment, as tired as he was, he said, "You're a foreigner. Thank you so much for coming." And he's the commander of the unit. He gives me a big hug. This is not the army I came from. And he said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from Canada." He said, "Canada? I worked with many Canadians before. I served in United Nations missions. I was a commander of United Nations Medical in Lebanon and Yemen." And I was like, "Okay, cool." That was in the medical effort, except for the Azov boys, they'd never seen a foreigner before, but it was so important for him, the commander, to come and acknowledge me and thank me. And when the Ukrainians are good to you, it's like they up the ante. So over the next few days, we worked. I remember the Eurovision Song Contest was on at that time, which had no bearing on us.
Oh, okay, but you were able to dodge that.
Yeah, I was able to dodge that, thankfully. Just giving you the time frame, a year it was,
right.
Around this time of year. But towards the end, I noticed I started this fundraiser for the four-wheel drive, and the money was building up. I didn't know how to do it, but they had a diesel generator that was like, you could see like a conveyor belt on it. Dun, 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 dun. It had to be 50 years old, and there was even a little sign on it, 3.5 kilowatts. So I don't know if you know about power output.
That's not even 2 fan heaters.
That's nothing, and they're running this medical point on that, and they had LED lights, but to do one thing you couldn't do the other, and everyone's working under a headlight. And that was the first diesel generator. This is running the whole thing. We had, on the busiest day, we had, not including the dead, we had over 7,300 wounded.
Wow.
Yeah. And then those are the ones who wouldn't make it to the hospital, or because someone has to make that call. That diesel generator stuck out to me because I used to be a showman. Like, I used to work all the events. So over the years,
lots of generators, yeah.
Yeah. Well, why pay £170 for power at a show, an event like in Newbury or wherever, or the Yorkshire Showgrounds, when I can bring a generator? And if they won't let me use a generator because it's all a money scam, I'll find a way to steal the power anyway. I'm not paying you £170 for 2 days. Don't judge me. So I was very passionate. I only went back to my old experience in life. I was fixated on that generator. I asked Igor, I said, would you make a little video for my Instagram? I was scared to ask him, like a man of his power and, his stature. And he said, this is what I'm trying to do for fundraise. He says, yes, it's important the world knows. It's important the world knows. And he made a little video with me. And I said, I can't promise you nothing, but someday I don't know how, I'll try to get you another generator. But I didn't want to make any promises. Before we left, I don't know what happened, but the Ukrainian Air Force bombed the shit out of the Russians, and we could see it in the distance. And just like in the movies, when they flew by, they did the little wave, and all of us little ants on the ground, Slava Ukraine! I don't say that word very often, and neither do they in the real war, but we left. By that time, I pretty much had enough money saved up to buy a four-wheel drive, and then some. And when the battle was over, we got told the next day, 2 days later, our rotation would be over. That was my first rotation, two months in the Zaporizhia front with 1st Armoured Brigade and the hospital.
Right.
So that was my first war. But I felt, if I could say this, I didn't know what war was. I always thought about war, the movie, like Vietnam, the infantrymen, Afghanistan. But what I seen at that stabilization point in the work I worked on, I'm 35 now. I don't got nothing to prove. I'm not 18-year-old. I need to be an infantryman. By that alone, I felt that's real war. I don't like people on my social media say, "Oh, you're like Hawkeye on MASH." MASH is a comedy. MASH is a comedy. Don't call me Hawkeye. But they don't understand. They mean well. But yeah, after my first run with 1st Armoured Brigade,
But you found a strong sense of purpose.
Yeah. I found a strong sense of purpose, and the way Igor Petrovich, a UN medical mission commander, the way he embraced me, his first foreigner that he ever had. I hoped I'd run into those guys later, and I did. But our unit were only seconded for so long. Then we were to go back to Kiev. But I didn't know how, but I wanted to come back to serve with them.
Right.
Yeah, that was real war.
And thank you so much for telling us about it.
Thank you. Thank you.